As we spoke about last week, we're in the time frame between Pesach and Shavuot, where traditionally the Jewish people have the tradition of learning Pirkei Avot on a weekly basis on Shabbat afternoon. And as we learned before, the aim of Pirkei Avot, unlike all the other Mishnaic tractates, which are focused on our legal obligation, the aim of Pirkei Avot is to teach us to go beyond the letter of the law. Lifnim b'shuras hadin. And as we explained from the Rabbi's commentaries, that what does that mean to go beyond the letter of the law? To go beyond the law means to look at the world through the lawgiver's perspective, because there's a law and there's a lawgiver. And sometimes we become so focused on the law in itself that we forget the spirit of the law, the very purpose for which the law was enacted. And to relegate Torah to black and white, ritualistic behavior in itself, as Chassidus explains, can bring a person away from Hashem himself. Therefore, we learn Pirkei Avot to internalize God's perspective of the world. Which world? Specifically our world, the human world. As we know that the human being is considered in the eyes of the Torah a microcosm, a micro world, as the world is a macro human being, and the human is a micro world. The Rebbe instructed that aside from reading Pirkei Avot every single Shabbat afternoon, the respective chapter of that afternoon, we should delve into at least one Mishnah in order to be able to get a glimpse that will empower us from within in order to bring that light into our day-to-day life. Last Shabbat, we learned Ch.2 of Pirkei Avot. So, before we delve into today's lesson, just to give an example, in 1991, the Rebbe discussed in a monumental Farbrengen that the first Mishnah in Pirkei Avot Ch.2 begins, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi says, which way should a man choose for himself? And he immediately answers, any way that it beautifies, that is beneficial both for the one who is treading upon this way and for those around him. In other words, the path that we should choose for ourselves is a balanced path, a path which promotes our growth and our self betterment, but at the same time we must remember that we don't live in a bubble, that we don't live individually in a fish tank, but rather each and every one of us are intertwined with each other, and therefore we can't just omit the world for self-improvement. Rather, self-improvement has to come from the lens of balance, of it has to be good for me, but at the same time, it must be beneficial for those around me. The video that you circulated last week about Rabbi Sarah Carmeli, when she started first making tshuva, and she was gun-ho about her Yiddishkeit, about a Chassidischkeit. The only challenge and dilemma was that her husband was completely against it. It was against Shabbat and Kashrut, and certainly Tzniut and her covering her hair. But she was very convinced that this is her path. Eventually, she wrote to the Rebbe as a She wrote to the Rebbe asking, what should she do? At home she's challenged, but she is certain that this is her path. Should she continue growing even though her husband is not part of that growth and is antagonistic of that growth? And she was certain that that's the path. Certainly you have advisors who advise people to separate because of religiosity or the lack of. If your spouse is not keeping Shabbat and refusing this and that, then she thought that the Rebbe would advise her in the same path. The dilemma that she was facing in that moment was that her husband wanted to travel to Thailand on business and wanted her to accompany him as a vacation of sorts. But going to Thailand means that she would have to go to a public beach, and it's not tzniut, and there are other issues that would have come up. So certainly that could have not been what Hashem wanted her to do. But as she stated, the Rebbe wrote back just the opposite. You should accompany him and don't speak about matters of religiosity. Don't speak about the points that separate you. Accompany him. You're his wife after all. And so she was somewhat taken aback by the answer, but the Rebbe said. Eventually, after the trip, her husband on the way back says, I guess we're not going to commune for another year now. Because on vacation, when you put everything aside, then you're able to relax and you're able to become more harmonized. But now that we're going back to our respective lives, you are religious and I'm not. And so I guess we're going to be at odds for the next year until the next vacation. But she realized in that moment that what she has done is driven religiosity between her and her husband. And that's not holy and that's not healthy. If anything, through reaching out and opening up and connecting to her husband, as a wife should, or vice versa, as a husband should, that would open up and release the defense mechanisms that create antagonistic perceptions on Judaism. And indeed, her husband made complete tshuva afterwards. Her children are frum and so on and so forth. When our sages advise, kol shehi tiferet, any path which is beautiful, which is beneficial for both the one who treads upon the path as well as those around him, Rabbi is teaching us a key to life. That we're all intertwined. And having said, being that we're all intertwined, as the Torah tells us, Kol Yisrael Aravim, all the Jewish people are intertwined one into the other. One's benefit must reveal itself in the other as well. But there's something even deeper here. The Rebbe asks in a talk in 1991, what is the question the Rabbi Yehuda Anasi is asking? Which path should a person choose for himself? He didn't choose for himself. Torah is a path for every single Jew. And as the Torah itself states, Torah is the most beautiful path. So what does it mean to choose for yourself? In short, the Rabbi cites the teaching from the Zohar, Tlat Kashrim Mitkashrim Dabada. There are three knots that are tied one into the other. Israel Boraisa, the Jewish people are tied into the Torah. And Oraisa Bekuchabrichu, and the Torah is intertwined, is connected to Hashem. But in delving into this teaching from the Zohar, there's a seeming discrepancy in the teaching in itself. The Zohar says there are three knots. but only cites two: the Jewish people to the Torah and the Torah to Hashem. Well, that's only two knots. The Zohar is saying there are three knots. Where's the third one over here? To hear the Rebbe says that what the Zohar is intimating is that there is the connection that a Jew has to Hashem through the Torah, yes, as the Torah in itself reveals the inner dimension of the Jew, the Pintele Yid, the inner frame of the person, and that's godly. So Torah reveals to us and instructs to us of how to remove all the layering and all the facades in order to reveal the purity of each and every one of us, which is our connection to Hashem. And ultimately, parenthetically, each mitzvah that the Torah teaches us, as we learned many times before, the word mitzvah on the surface level means commandment, but it's also etymologically related to the word tzavta v'chibur, which means connection and bond. As each mitzvah in itself is a commandment, but the inner dimension of this commandment is the connection that the Jew reveals and enforces between themselves and God. We're commanded because it doesn't come natural to us. What comes natural to us is our body consciousness, our physicality, our corporality, our animalistic self, our ego. And as we learned in the Tanya classes, the ego, the animal soul, is capable of being benevolent, kind, and merciful when it suits it, as we're going to be learning in the relationship class tomorrow night. But when it doesn't suit it, it rejects it. We're commanded upon behavior, thoughts, emotions, and behaviors which don't come natural to us. We're commanded to speak, to communicate in a way that doesn't naturally come to us. We're not commanded to eat food. We're commanded to eat kosher food. Because eating food is not unique to the Jew, not to the human being, or not to any organic life. Everything must consume something in order to be able to live and to grow in, etc. But the type of food that we eat, well, that we're commanded upon because it doesn't come natural to us to eat kosher. Certainly it's much easier to find non-kosher food in this world than it is to find kosher. Certainly kosher food is more expensive than non-kosher food because of the preparation that is involved in it. Eating kosher doesn't mean eating healthy. Yes, the preparation in itself and its sheer form, kosher food should be healthy. And certainly the Rabbi spoke about this in different letters, advising parents whose children have anxiety issues or have different psychological issues to check the kashrut. But then the Rabbi also advised that aside from the kashrut, check the ingredients to make sure that they are aligned with what a child needs. Either way, we're not advised to eat food, but we're advised to eat kosher food. We're commanded, to eat because it goes against our natural grain. But in going against the natural grain means to go against the body consciousness, the animalistic consciousness. And as we learned in the meditation class, what the very fact that each and every one of us has a soul, which is a chelek elokam mimal mamish, an actual part of God from the above, but it's encrusted by the animal soul. It's encrusted by the body, by the corporality of the body. So although we have a piece of infinity to us, within us, which is our core, but being that is concealed by several layering, it's very difficult to be able to be in touch with it, let alone be fluidly connected to it to the extent that it inspires us, that it motivates us on a day-to-day basis. How much more so to transcend the corporality enough not to be bogged down by it, so we could be affected by it and not be affected by it. As the world, the axiom of the world, one should aim and strive to change the world with their smile, and certainly not allow the world to change their smile. Well, if the body consciousness, which is very tempered and very limited and very self-absorbed, is the primary consciousness of the person, it's very difficult to go beyond their egocentric perspectives. Therefore, in order, and that's what we spoke about meditation, the different type of meditation, in order to be able to reveal the inner core of the Jew, they have to be able to temper the body consciousness, to subdue it in favor of the godly soul. Not to eliminate it, not to eradicate it, God forbid. Our bodies and our animal soul are very, very vital to our mission in this world, as we're here to transform the body in itself, the body and the body of the world. But we're in order to be able to transform it, we need to be able to subdue it enough so it won't constantly encrust us. So the commandment in itself, the mitzvah in itself, is there to allow the Jew, through the activity, through the speech, or through the mindset and the emotions, to be able to remove that incrustation and reveal the true self. And once the true self comes out, well, what's ultimately revealed is I'm one with God. I'm not a doctor, I'm not a lawyer, I don't identify as a he, she, or any of that. That's what I do. I am a piece of God. Pure, holy, infinite. And so, the mitzvah in itself enjoins us to look deeper inside of ourselves for the truth. And when one is able to see the inner dimension of oneself, then certainly they will be able to see the inner dimension of the world in itself. So the Zohar says that there are three connections, there are three binds, there are three knots. The Jew to the Torah, and the Torah to Hashem. So we just discussed the connection to Hashem through the Torah. Where's the third connection? Where's the third knot? Israel to the Torah, Torah to the Hashem, that's only two knots. Where's the third? Well, we could look at it as a triangle. There's the two sides, but there's a whole entire other dimension of our connection, which is that ultimately a Jew is not connected to Hashem. A Jew is a piece of God. And therefore we have an immediate, constant connection to Hashem that surpasses the connection that we have to Hashem even from the Torah. Again, Pirkei Avot is not a Mishnah that teaches us our legal obligations. We have all the other tractates that teach us how to legally serve God. Pirkei Avot assumes that we've already established that framework in our day-to-day life of our legal obligation as far as Torah and mitzvot, and now a Jew wants to climb beyond that. Sort of, if a wife or a husband wakes up in the morning and their spouse gives them a checklist of chores that need to be performed throughout the day, if the spouse from the morning to the night spends the entirety of the day performing those tasks and checks off box by box, and at the end of the day, delivers that completed checklist to their spouse, does that make them a good spouse? On a superficial level, yes. But then again, we don't get married in order to perform chores. We don't get married to throw out the trash. We don't get married to go to work. We don't get married to bring flowers. We get married because this is our oneness. The oneness needs to be expressed in actuality, in Paul Mamish, not just in inspiration, not just in emotion, not just in thought, but in actuality.
What is actuality?
In throwing out the trash and giving compliments and giving flowers and in being there and so on and so forth. The emotion in itself is nice, but if it's not actualized, it has no meaning. It has no purpose. The previous Rabbi was once sitting in a Farbrengen, with the Hasidim, with some of the greatest, most astute Hasidim. This was on a Shabbos afternoon. And the Farbrengen was so what's called in Yiddish geschmack. It was so tasty, it was so amazing, that the Hasidim didn't want to stop the Farbrengen. However, the time of Mincha came along. And the Rabbi asked, what time is it? And someone gave an off time. And it happened to be one of the greatest Hasidim by the name of Ch.2. And the previous Rabbi turns to him and says, Ch.2, listen, Or Ein Sof is not a Metzias, it's not a reality. Infinite light is not a reality. The Farbrengen is not a reality, etc. The reality is Mincha. What does that mean? All this inspiration, what does it result in? What comes out from this? And the easiest way to say this is, what benefit does God have from this?
So in the recording of the relationship class, you were saying how that's what empathy is like really knowing what's needed for the person we're in a relationship with, including Hashem. So is this practical piece a parallel?
Yeah, we're going to develop that in tomorrow's next class. What benefit does your spouse or your children have from your love if it doesn't materialize into the activity in itself? As in Yiddish, there's an axiom, saying I love you is not expensive at all. Doesn't cost you anything. In actuality, what are you doing about it? So there's there's the obvious routine that one needs to follow in order to maintain that relationship, the chores, etc., etc. But what's beyond the chores? What's beyond that? So you finished all the chores. Are you, okay, so I threw out the garbage, I took this and I went to work, I picked this up, I picked the kid, okay. Do I go back to my normal scheduled programming? So now I've done everything I could do, I could just be by myself? No. The essential motivation should have been the relationship. And now that you've accomplished these things in honor of the relationship, those are obligations. Where do you, as the other half of this relationship, add to this relationship beyond the chores? And this is what Rabbi Yehuda Nasi is asking: which path should a person choose for himself? Not, God forbid, insinuating that there's Torah, but there's also other paths, and as they say, all rivers lead to the sea. So eventually, no, God forbid. A Jew must learn the Torah and perform the mitzvot. It's a must. But beyond that, what else is there? Rabbi Yehuda Nasi is asking, which path should an Adam, as the Rabbi explains, that their Torah deems or designates 4 titles to humanity. There's Adam, there's Ish, there's Gever, and there's Enosh. Adam is someone who has reached intellectual and emotional perfection as far as their congruency and as far as their being completely and utterly subdued to Hashem. And the opposite extreme is Enosh, someone whose heart is completely convoluted. A person who's completely convoluted, self-serving, self-absorbed, etc., meek and weak.
The 4 sons as well.
Well, it's maybe, perhaps you have to think about that. Yeah, maybe. Yeah. Either way, the Torah, Rabbi Yehuda is asking, which path should Adam choose for himself? In other words, a person who's already completed everything. Now what? As the famous question in the world, if a couple lives together, are married for 50 years, Rabbi Goldberg once told me the first 50 years of the marriage are the hardest. And then it becomes easier afterwards. But what happens when you work through your quirks? And those quirks are no longer an impediment between the husband and the wife, or any type of relationship for that matter. What then? No more quirks, no more bickering, no more back and forth. Everything's been settled. Now what? Now your marriage begins. Everything else was preempted for that, to reveal your essential bond, your essential connection. When the Rambam says that when Mashiach will come, the mitzvot will be nullified. Does that mean that we're not going to put on tefillin? That they're not going to be kosher? They're not going to be Shabbat candles? No. It means that it's no longer going to be a mitzvah. It's not going to be. We won't have to be commanded because it's not going to, because our form is going to be absolutely pure and it will become natural. This will be the way you will look at relationship. Of course, I want to do this. I don't have to be told to do this. This is all I want to do. So you get to a level of your relationship where it's not that I have to sacrifice. As we learned, the word korban in English has two ways of translating it. The traditional is sacrifice. I have an animal, I have material, whatever it is, and I need to sacrifice it for something greater than myself. But sacrifice implies that I want this. And if I didn't have to give this, I would have rather retained this for myself rather than give it up. But the relationship requires it, so I have to put it on the altar. Everything needs a starting point, and if that's the starting point, that's the starting point. But that's from the animal self looking upwards and wants to self-refine. The point of origin is oneself. The inner dimension of the word korban milashon kiruv lihit karev, closeness. And in order to achieve closeness, you have to give. You have to give first of yourself, and you have to eventually give yourself over completely. Therefore, the inner dimension translation of korban is offering. I am offering myself. I'm offering the animal. I'm offering this item for the sake of attaining a deeper closeness. And that comes from the lens of the relationship in itself, from the point of truth in itself, from the godly soul in itself. Understanding that the entire reason why I was giving this animal soul is in order to bring it closer to God. It's not losing itself, it's gaining its true form. So Rabbi Yehuda Nasi is asking, okay, so once we finished with the checklist, what's next? Again, this is Pirkei Avot. This is not of legal nature. It's beyond the law. So Rabbi Yehuda is asking, what's beyond the law? Once we've committed and we are treading upon the path of Torah and Mitzvot, what's next? In other words, where do I reveal my connection to Hashem? Where do I offer myself up to God? As David HaMelech bemoans in Tehillim, my tears were like bread to me throughout the day and the night when they say to me, where is your God? He's not saying that I'm crying because people are asking, where is God? That's an easy answer. He's everywhere. Whatever that means, but he is everywhere. The question is, where is your God? Where is the point that you know is the absolute truth, and therefore you're willing to completely commit and offer everything up for this point? Not because you're obliged, but you have a uniqueness to you that only you have, and that must be focused on the relationship in itself. As our Talmudic sages teach us that the only reason why gold was created is to be used for the Beit HaMikdash. In other words, the only reason luxury in this world was created in the first place is in order to serve God with it. Because on the surface level, on the mundane level, every human being needs to eat, to drink, and have a physical life. But that's every species. Why would God create uniquenesses? Animals don't have uniquenesses. They're pre-programmed. And even if you find a seeing eye dog, a therapy dog, well, that's part of its framework. That's part of its program. You can't program or reprogram, I should say, an alligator to be a therapy alligator, a seeing eye alligator. It just doesn't work. It's not programmed for that. Animals, plants, and inanimate objects are all created and served the same way throughout all their species. Human beings, on the other hand, are endowed with uniqueness. As the Talmud says, just like our faces don't resemble one another, so too our opinions don't resemble one another. Each one of us is given a uniqueness. And that uniqueness is looked upon as a luxury. Because we wouldn't necessarily need this uniqueness in order to exist. This uniqueness is endowed within each and every one of us to reveal the glory of Hashem. As the Mishnah in chapter 6 of Pirkei Avot concludes, or the Baraita actually, the last chapter of Pirkei Avot concludes that everything that Hashem created in His world, He created only for His glory. In other words, every item, every experience is there to reveal God. So one's uniqueness, one's strength, one's mindset, one's emotions, whatever they're strong with, that's the uniqueness that Hashem endowed them in order to be able to reveal Him throughout their frame and throughout the world. And this is the deeper dimension of what Zusha of Anapoli meant when he was asked, would you like to be Avram Avinu? And he says, God forbid. For what benefit it would be to Hashem to have two Avrahams and not even one Zusha. Which sounds, at least from the outset, like an egocentric statement. What do you mean? Avram was the founder and of Yiddishkeit, of Hebrewism, of knowledge of Hashem in this world. He was he was bottled to Hashem. He was nullified to Hashem in every way possible. Why not have an extra Avraham? Are you better than Avraham? No, that's not what he means. But if Hashem created an Avraham, he means he needs an Avraham. And if Hashem's created a Zusha, it means he needs a Zusha. Zusha is endowed with Zusha's talents and abilities and uniqueness, just like Avraham is. The question is, what does God gain from this? Not what I gain. Of course, I love to be Avraham, no Yetzer Hara, and be able to see God and talk to God. Of course. But that's not what God needs. So what Yehuda Nasi is asking, which path should a person choose for himself, means once you've committed to Torah and mitzvot, where do you reveal the Himself in your connection to Hashem? And that's why he continues, any path which is both is beautiful, harmonized, prudent, beneficial for the one who's treading upon the path, in other words, for the individual himself. But how do you know if it's prudent and is beneficial and harmonious? If it benefits the world in itself, the people around you. Because Ani itzalti et atzmi, I saved myself, is not our axiom. This is why, by the way, our sages explain why Noach wasn't included in the forefathers. Although Noach as the Torah itself testify, Noach was a righteous and sincere individual who walked with Hashem. And Hashem, out of all of humanity, chose Noach to save humanity when he flooded the world. But Noach's path took him on self-preservation. Instead of entreating God, let me go and try to transform the world around me. The question is, what does God gain from this? And so Rabbi Yehuda Nasi is saying, which path should a person choose for himself? In other words, I've already committed to Torah and mitzvot. I'm on that path. But now, what is my ultimate gift to Hashem? It's myself. It's the uniqueness. As the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot tells us, give God from yours, because what is yours is actually His. So at first, it's including all in God. There's no world, there's no humanity, there's no universe, there's nothing other than God. Complete oneness. But then, there is the world, that Hashem creates the world. And the world obscures God. Because you have one, well, that's terrific. Now you have two, there's room for conflict. 3 represents the harmonizing. So through our activities, from the lens of the Torah and mitzvot, we're able to reveal the true self, the true form of ourself, and therefore the true form of every one of our uniquenesses, and then be able to offer that up to God, which is a novelty. Because when everything is one, and including in God, obviously everything, there's no need for bittul. It's all God. When there is a world, well, the world in itself obscures and denies God. But when the world in itself, when a human being works through the lens of Torah and mitzvot and discovers the true purpose, a true form of everything in this world, this is a novelty which harmonizes both Hashem and the world as one. And this is what Rabbi Yehuda Nasi is teaching us. That aside from Torah and mitzvot, what gift does each and every one of us possess? What uniqueness, what understanding, what experience does each and every one of us have that could be offered up to Hashem? And where do we see that it's offered up to Hashem? Specifically, and how does that help harmonize the world with God? So it has to be beneficial to those around you. In other words, if a person is gifted with compassion, with empathy, everyone has, but each person is given an extra measure somewhere. So they could be a therapist. They could heal the world. If they have a proclivity for blood, like the Gemara says, someone who is born under the auspices of Mars is going to have a proclivity for blood. Well, from the world's perspective, those kind of people become murderers, robbers, fighters. But from God's perspective, someone who has a proclivity for blood, how do you use that for God? You can become a butcher, a mohel, a surgeon. Because there are some people who see blood and they'll faint immediately or are disgusted by it. They want to help the world, but they just can't. I remember I asked a certain rabbi to be the sandak of one of my children during the Brit Milah. He says, I can't. If I see blood, I faint immediately. So in other words, to take that uniqueness, and how does that benefit Hashem? And what does it mean benefit Hashem? It has to benefit what Hashem wants, the world. If a person is gifted with the art of gab, they could go have a radio show. Like I always thought to myself, Howard Stern is brilliant. He has such an amazing ability to speak, to interview. If he utilized that for Hashem, do you know how powerful? In other words, the things that seemingly conflict are always meant to serve Hashem. First, you need to train yourself to look at the world and act upon the world from God's perspective, not the Torah. That's the Torah, and that's a mitzvah. But then, how do you use the uniqueness in itself? That's what Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi is telling us. That Yiddishkeit is not just Torah and mitzvot. Torah and mitzvot are foundational to Yiddishkeit. But Yiddishkeit is Mesiras Nefesh, is to give yourself over to God. Every part of you, every experience, every up and every down, every uniqueness. And so, if this is what I've experienced, how do I utilize that experience to benefit, for myself to grow and for those around me to grow? Like there was a woman who, God forbid, lost her child to a sickness, lo aleinu, and the Rebbe advised her to start therapy groups, support groups for people who go through this. And so she said, from this I started a Tehillim group, and anybody who I know who, God forbid, had somebody sick in their house, I maneuver and facilitate that food will be delivered, and if they need babysitting, and so on and so forth. In other words, okay, so the Torah tells us to be kind and to be merciful, etc., etc. But where does my experience reveal that? Not just in the generic, I have to give tzedakah. But where does my uniqueness truly shine here? We'll continue this tomorrow, Mr. Hashem.